this topic. And then my own girls grew up. And so this is my whole world, and now I'm inviting you into it. So my why. My why is I want every opportunity for those young girls on top to have their chance to live out their sporting dreams right here. There should be we should be working every day to remove each barrier that they will face. And we've heard a lot about them: gender-based violence, cultural barriers, all of those things. Girls drop out of sport at twice the rate of boys between the ages of 11 and 14. That's pretty ubiquitous. That's in the UK, the US, Europe. That's in other parts of the world too. Data is varied depending on where you are. We know that one of the main reasons girls drop out is because of the effects of puberty and the onset of menstruation. Body confidence is also one of their main topics, and those are all interrelated. Yet nowhere in, as far as I can find, in our systems for coaching education, our systems for educating physical therapists, physios, sport medicine, support staff, do we see female-specific physiology. Not in a systematic way. It's hit and miss here and there. And that's really what I want to do, is to try to take the research that we've done, which is not complete, but there's a good foundation, and take that to those of you who are working in the field and see that, where can I fit this in? Where can I put in more information to support our girls and women? It's not just about keeping girls in sport. It's also about their overall health and well-being. It's about learning about how their body works, which is a way to also learn towards body autonomy that can feed into all kinds of things about agency for girls and women in the future. Of course, it's about athlete development, training, and performance. That's not my area of expertise, but I can point you to some pretty amazing experts on that subject for those of you working in the high-performance realm. And so we're looking at this really from the lens of education and how we can improve education systems. And I'm looking at this through the lens of a researcher, a teacher, and a mom, AKA gross mom, because I talk about all the gross bodily functions that we have to live with. Okay. So we'll take a moment to check out this comic strip that my eldest daughter made a few years ago. And I just asked her to describe what it was like when she learned about menstruation, right? So she learned in school. Many of us probably learned in school. If you feel comfortable, please raise your hand if you learned about menstruation in school. Okay, quiet. And I see some men too. Ooh, that's good. Take a note of that, Leela. Okay. So many of us learned the basics in school, but it probably stopped there. So there's two things I really notice about this. One is that the boys were not asked to join this conversation. The boys got to go out and play football on apparently the one sunny day of the year in Scotland, while the girls sat and learned about, in her words, how our lives were doomed forever. And the other thing is, the focus here is not on how do you feel, what's going to keep you healthy, how do you process this change in your life? No, the focus is on capture it, conceal it, cover it up, don't let anybody ever know that your body is impure, right? That's the extreme version of that. But really, all of the focus around products is important and necessary, but that's not what the heart of the situation is, right? It's about learning, understanding, and education. So hold this thought in your mind, and I want to ask at the end if you can share any stories about how you might have learned about menstruation in your life. So we started doing some research on this. I did my first study on this with Dr. Mwamba in Zambia, and we got some beautiful drawings and writings from the girls in the NAUSPAR program there to share their thoughts and experiences. And then most recently, I did a study that we nearly got 500 adult athletes to respond to, mostly in the UK and US and Europe. And what you can see from this is, for sure, they are impacted, right? Close to 90%. Yes, we're impacted by our menstrual cycle, and we don't like it. It's not good. 90%, or close to, of these participants, Yet, very few of them ever spoke a word about it to their coaches. And that's where we see the gap. That's where we see the problem, right? So we know this is happening. We know this is a factor for girls, for adults. We know it's impactful for their engagement, their fun, their enjoyment. It's also impactful for their performance and their development as athletes. Yet we're not talking about it. And that's why I always go back to the source of most of the problems to do with menstruation are really about the taboo. It's really about not being able to have these conversations. So what I did with the research from Zambia, from that study, collecting studies from other amazing researchers around the world, is developed an education program. So I work now with coaches. We run workshops. I've got printouts and things that you can hang in the locker room. And we talk about the basics of the menstrual cycle. I'm not going to go through this right now. We just don't have time. But it's all available to use. Everything's open access. And so based on those researches, I looked through all of the different phases, the different common symptoms. Of course, every body is different. So what I experience is different than the person next to me, physically and culturally and emotionally. But we can find common ways to support athletes. And one of them is just learning this is a tool. Our menstrual cycles teach us about how our body is working. It's a vital sign. And so it can be used to educate young people or anyone, especially in sports, right? We're using our bodies. We need to understand and listen to our bodies. How do I fuel myself to feel my best? How do I rest myself to feel my best? Because I always get coaches, how do we adjust training and adapt? Rest. Focus on rest. Because the biggest problem is actually muscle recovery. But we can use these tools for performance, but also to get that understanding of how our bodies work. So drawing on that too, we want to think about what is the role of the coach. And like I said, most of them had not had conversations with their coaches or very minimally. And then beyond that, they thought their coach could help. And that's important, right? They believe in their coach. And when in my conversations with coaches and athletes, less so in this research, but in some of the workshops I've done, what I realize is the coach is saying, I don't want to embarrass the athlete. I don't want her to feel embarrassed about this topic. And the athlete is saying, I'm fine. I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to embarrass her. I don't want to embarrass my coach. So again, it comes back to that taboo. And so we have to break that open. Coaches feel like they have a lack of knowledge. They feel like there's too much shame and taboo. And in my view, we have a duty of care as leaders, as coaches, as leaders in sport organizations, to have these conversations, to support young athletes in particular, and to help prevent some of the shame and embarrassment and trauma that they can experience. Beyond the education piece, that's my number one, menstrual health education, there are environmental and structural and policy elements that we can improve on. You're seeing a lot, I don't know if you've seen these stories, like when the Women's World Cup, it was on one of the slides earlier, but I got to be a part of the Women's World Cup in Australia last summer. So changing shorts, including, getting rid of white shorts and uniforms, having access to toilet facilities. I've studied places from, we have the same exact problem in England as, and I never pronounce it right, you tell me.
Where? Lesotho.
Lesotho. Same problem of we don't have access to toilets. The wealthiest countries, across to the poorest countries, girls might be put on these fields that don't have access to toilets. That's a problem. That's a huge barrier. And in my view, a lot of it isn't that people are intentionally trying to make it difficult, right? This is the epitome of that sport is designed for male bodies and male experiences. We've forgotten about women's experiences. We've forgotten that women are not small men. And we need to reincorporate that into all of these policies and practices. Things like changing rooms, toilets, sports bras, coping with pain. Those are all really important things to include in our coaching education and in our policies and practices. Okay, I'm wrapping up. That's the end of my menstruation piece, but I also want to just point to a few things. We had some really great conversations at lunch about motherhood and the role of motherhood. I recently wrote a book chapter with the Queen of the Caribbean, Dr. Sasha Sutherland. She's amazing. And so that's one way to look at what we're doing for athletes who are mothers and what we're doing to promote coaches and leaders. My view, a big reason why we don't have more coaches and leaders that are women is work-family conflict. And that's not just a cultural problem, that's a structural problem. And there's also really good resources about menopause, strength training, and health and well-being into menopause. Okay, the last slide, I just want to point you to some of these resources because there's really good stuff coming out right now. Most of this is on the high-end, like sport physiology side, but if you're interested in that, Fitter Woman is the app designed for the U.S. Women's National Team to work within their menstrual cycles, designed by Dr. Georgie Brunvels. Stacy Sims' work is amazing, and if you want to hear more of the personal stories, read that book, Good for a Girl, it's amazing too. And then I have a lot of these resources available, like those printouts on my website. So I am out of time, so I'm gonna move on, but we'll have questions. Leila, you wanna lead that?
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's wonderful. I saw some people falling asleep, but they've all woken up. Is everyone comfortable having this conversation? Because I've been to places where I've been told, don't talk about it, you can't talk about it here. So we are all comfortable, right? Anyway, you have no choice, you just have to stay. What I suggest is that we go to the next presentation, okay? And then you keep your questions, and think about this. How comfortable are you now taking this back to your board? How many of you, especially the men, how many of you have had a conversation like this in your organizations? Oh, we have 1, 2, wow, wonderful. So think about it. How would you take this back and how would you talk about this as an important topic with your board, okay? I introduce you from here? Sure. So, Dr. Jacqueline Hadfield cultural behavioral scientist who assesses women's beliefs and behaviors regarding physical activity. She leads the Women's Exercise Culture and Behavior Laboratory at Louisiana State University, which produces research focused on finding meaning in the relationship between social, cultural, and behavioral factors within health beliefs and behaviors among women. Her work uncovers salient health determinants that address the unique needs of women to live healthy and active lives. And I know she likes to dance, and she has taken her research to practice by founding her own dance organization. Company. Just like Sarah did with her research doing Power to Play period. Thank you, Jacqueline.
All right, well, thank you so much. How's everyone doing? Yeah, we're hanging in there. It's a pleasure to be here. It is absolutely beautiful here. Clearly, I'm from the United States, so I would like to take this opportunity to encourage all of you to go ahead and stand on up, because it's going to be really ironic for me to talk about physical activity, its health benefits, and how to avoid sedentary lifestyles if you've been sitting all day and I don't give you this opportunity. Yeah. All right, now I do my social experiment of extending this invitation to stay standing during my presentation or to sit down. A womp womp. All right. All right, so thank you again, Leila, for that introduction. I know everyone's like, do I sit down, do I stand up? Up to you, up to you. This is culture, this is social norms in the making right here. What I'm gonna be talking to you about is women's physical activity throughout the lifespan and talking more about this relationship that women have across these developmental phases that we go through. I have this LSU slide up here. That's the institution that I am currently with. I direct the Women's Exercise Culture and Behavior Lab, like Leila just said, and I'm kind of harnessing this LSU United States to go ahead and say, I'm very well aware I'm bringing my North American perspective to this research. However, I am a cross-cultural researcher. So I do research on the cross-cultural experience and relationship that women have to understand those similarities and differences, which I'll be talking about today. So, Technical difficulties. You know what, we're just gonna roll with it, everybody. All right, so before we discuss this journey that women go through, I wanna take another opportunity to describe myself outside of my institution. I identify as, I didn't even touch anything, you guys saw that, right? Wow. We'll just keep it there, thanks so much, okay. I identify as a woman, a scholar, a single mother, a dancer, and an exerciser. Now, the reality is I have a greater likelihood of running across women across the globe that will share openly in their identity as number 3, a single mother. More likely than someone to identify as a scholar or a dancer or an exerciser. And there are historical and cultural and social factors that influence that identity that we embody. And that's what I'll be describing in more detail today. And there's a journey that we go through to get to that identity. And it starts in girlhood. So in girlhood, movement is about fun. It's more socially acceptable to see a girl running around than it is to see a grown woman running around. At this point, developmentally, there is less of an awareness of effort and ability. And these are two constructs that are key in motivation to do a behavior. At this age, they're not discerning between if I put in more effort, I have greater ability. It's focused on function. My body can do this. How can my body do this rather than my body can't do this? Now, it's very important because our early lived experiences inform our behaviors across the lifespan. And as a behavioral scientist, I bring this connection that our beliefs and our behaviors do inevitably influence our health. Then the journey continues into adolescence. So at this point, identities are starting to be formed, just like those identities that I shared with you a few minutes ago. Yes, these identities are malleable, but at this point, it's starting to get cemented. Social comparison is heightened. At this point, developmentally, we create a distinction between effort and ability. Girls are able to see that those that put in more effort aren't necessarily having greater ability, and those with higher ability don't necessarily have to put in more effort. These are key motivational constructs. So it's going to influence their behaviors within physical activity throughout the lifespan. Body image hyper-awareness sets in at this phase developmentally, and this is linked to that social comparison. Women, young girls, start to realize the essence of objectification of the female body at this point. Whether it's really cemented into the actual know-how of its presence in their life, they're starting to realize that their body, it has more womanliness, and womanliness is objectified. And we'll talk further about that fun topic later. Function and rationale for movement at this point is less so than when they were girls. This creates a complex motivation orientation in regards to physical activity behaviors. Now, at this point, some of you might have been realizing she hasn't said the word sport. Okay, this is great. Behaviorally, sport, fitness, exercise, physical activity are different behavior categories. So they will inherently bring with them different beliefs that will influence behavior. So it's important to distinguish between those two. However, working in the EU, I do know that sport tends to have more of an inclusive terminology. But the terms that we use influence meaning and understanding influences culture. Now, throughout the rest of this, I want you to think about, through the rest of the lifespan of a woman, think about the girl that was picked last in PE class, gym class, never played sports, did not belong to a family that put her in dance classes or private lessons or anything like that. How does this influence her journey with health and movement? We then get to the early adulthood phase. At this point, we're able to explore consumer abilities. Barriers and accessibility to being active are well realized, whether that's barriers in identity, identifying as someone that exercises. Again, we see how identity plays a role here. Or financial, if there's a mindset that exercise can only happen in a certain context, at a gym, there might be financial perceived barriers. Locations, do they even live in a walkable, safe area to be active? Knowledge about how to move the body and knowledge about exercise, as well as their previous lived experiences. Motivation at this point has somewhat been cemented, and it's tending to be either intrinsically or extrinsically motivation. And the research has consistently shown that when we are extrinsically motivated to engage in physical activity behaviors, it is not sustainable. And our motivations are based off of the messaging that we receive. So we're exposed to more sources of messaging at this point in our life. For some context, I could not find an appropriate Google image search of young adult women doing exercise to share with you today. It's sexualized, it's objectified, it's focused on the female body parts, and that kind of gets into this complex conversation of we do want to highlight and celebrate the female function and athleticism, but how can we do it in a way that is packaged to make it more relatable to all women? Because globally, women are less physically active than men. So my findings, specifically throughout my work, has shown that when messages are geared towards a focus of fun and well-being and are representative of different body types, races, and ethnicities, young adult women have higher intention to engage in exercise and physical activity behaviors. So to expand on messaging, culture is visually and linguistically communicated. There's a culture of movement, physical activity, exercise, sport, fitness, and there's a culture of how people are treated. And how people are treated and viewed impacts their beliefs and their behaviors, and this influences health. Not only do we have gender inequity issues in sport, we have gender inequity issues in health. Next, we get into the middle adulthood phase. So at this point, barriers to being physically active change. There might be family barriers. Now, if motherhood is pursued, it brings with it not only the barriers of caretaking, but a changing body, which motherhood, pregnancy, and postpartum and exercise can be a presentation in itself. In the essence of time, we'll discuss the next barrier. The number one reported barrier across the globe for women is time. Now, this is regardless of motherhood, because not every woman pursues motherhood. Women are stretched for time with the overburdening of service placed and expected upon them. And this is not a cultural issue, this is patriarchal. So lastly, what happens here in this middle adulthood phase is the exclusivity gap, what I call. So if you didn't identify as an exerciser, as one that moved their body, or an athlete prior to this phase in your life, why would you all of a sudden do that? Especially when the messaging that is abundant is something like this. This was in People magazine of being a fit mom. Okay, so this is a mother of 3. I will celebrate any woman that is active. Congratulations to her. But when this is the message that is abundantly received for cultures, it creates this unattainable goal. This is an incredibly difficult move to do on a stability ball. And it's showing, and she's physically fit. She fits the Western idealized standard of beauty. Beauty is a whole other thing to get into too. So back to the messaging, this is creating the unattainable standards that women are put towards, and it creates this gap. Interestingly, my findings show that women in this phase of life are more likely to sustain exercise when they receive messaging of it being fun. Then we get to later adulthood. I find it so interesting that when I do my data dives into the imagery of exercise, that all of a sudden older adult women, they're happy when they're exercising. Everyone's happy. Women are all smiling. But younger or middle adulthood, they're serious. They're fit. we're not happy. So again, I find it ironic that if we talk to the women and what influences their behaviors and the way that they see and move their bodies, they want it to be fun. They want to see women that look like them. But ironically, we have an industry that is saturated with aesthetically based messaging. This is getting women nowhere. It's keeping us unfit and unwell. So sadly, at this phase, if a woman is already, sadly, if physical activity is only pursued due to a negative health event at this phase in life. But if a woman is already engaging in exercise at this point, she was beforehand. Sadly, if a woman faces a negative health event and wants to start exercising to combat that, it's so much harder for her, and the likelihood of her engaging in a physically active lifestyle at this age is much less, and her health will deteriorate as a result. Oopa. So what can we talk about cross-culturally here? The lived experiences of women, there are shared experiences, there are different experiences. But there's the shared experience that women desire consistency in movement. This desire shows that inevitably women have faced a drop-off with having consistency, which I find even more interesting to a lot of what we've been talking about. Women's first memories of exercise take place in a sport context in girlhood. And not every woman continues to play sport. So there was a disconnect in her journey with movement that led her to not sustaining it and seeking a desire for consistency. So what can we do about this? I don't know. So what can we do about this? Blank. All right, the culture must change, but that takes time. We've talked about this. So this is an ever-present theme. So how can we change culture? As culture is visually and linguistically communicated, it makes sense that social media is a driver of culture. Social media is reinforcing myths and norms that are keeping women unwell and unfit. However, at the same time, it can be a tool to dismantle this type of narrative that is keeping women unwell and unfit and drop-off rates in sports engagement or physical activity across the lifespan. There is power in imagery, representation, making it about fun, overall health and happiness, not about the fittest in the room, the best. We want fun, we want health, we want happiness, we want to see women that look like us and the person sitting next to us. There are early legislative efforts that could possibly help marketing norms enforce this type of narrative. These norms could have generational influence, and that's where culture changes. In tandem, the opportunity to work with the fitness industry, which has a tandem both sport and exercise. Globally, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's great promise in there because their marketing efforts are reaching the masses and creating this narrative that we have today. And then lastly, education. Education alone is not going to solve anything in regards to this phenomenon because everyone knows being physically active is great for them. They know it's scientifically proven to prevent disease and promote health, yet we have a physical inactivity epidemic. So education about being critical consumers of the content and the messages that people receive. The discerning fact from myth of health, women's health, bodies, women's bodies. We can demand this of our communities because it is indeed a human right. We've commodified something that we didn't need to. All we need really is our bodies, but we've commodified it in sport and fitness. It's not going anywhere, but we have tools to be able to make this change for the greater public health. And we can demand this, and this can look anything from the little girl that wants to run everywhere she needs to go, to the young adult that simply likes riding her bike to work, or to the woman or girl that always wants to be able to play her favorite sport with friends throughout the lifespan. That's all I have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I think she deserves a big hand because to come all the way to Lausanne, Olympic capital, and not mention the word sport, that's a feat. I have questions, we have time, but I would like to start with a question from the floor. Yeah? Okay, we have lots of questions, good.
Thanks so much for the presentations, and I'm really glad to see the question of health included in the conference for today. I think my question is mostly for Sarah. I am someone who is not comfortable when we start talking about menstrual cycles and their relationship to women's experiences in sport. And the reason for that is that I generally find that these conversations are very reductive, that they tend to homogenise women's experiences of the menstrual cycle. They also, for me, can go dangerously close to depicting the menstrual cycle as a foundational element in women's performance and athletic capabilities, when in fact the research to date shows us that there is no demonstrable link between phases of the menstrual cycle and athletic performance in most women. So my question for you is around how do you manage talking about menstrual cycle in a way that doesn't essentialise the menstrual cycle as a supposedly homogenous element of women's experiences in sport? How do you hang on to the heterogeneity and keep the complexity of that in the forefront, especially when you're engaging with sports organisations who are not necessarily going to be on the lookout for these tendencies to essentialise women's bodies and presume a biological basis to our performances in sport? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's not a simple way because there are so many myths and so many stories around menstruation, as Leela read from the very beginning, to, all the way from that menstruation is the root of all evil, to the hysterical woman, right? That expectation, that lore. And the essentializing is a big problem, right? So what I try to present is these are common symptoms. Every person is different. Every person experiences things differently, physically, emotionally, mentally, all of that. So it's really important to stress that. So one athlete may come with some concerns and, struggles coping with pain, and that doesn't mean that athlete's weak. That doesn't mean that athletes necessarily something's wrong with them. When I talk to coaches, I say, first of all, it should not be debilitating. You should not have such a difficult menstrual cycle that you can't move, but some people feel that way. And that's beyond the role of a coach. That's the coach showing support, showing help, and referring that person to healthcare professionals. But the first thing you need to do is believe them. Trust women. Trust girls. It's her experience. And if she tells you this is how she feels, believe her. Don't fall into this, well, how do I know if she's faking it? I get that one a lot. How do I know if she's faking it? Believe her. There's no good that's going to come from not believing her. So we start from that point and understanding everyone has these different experiences, and that the work that I do, especially at grassroots level, right? So I'm pointing to, for sport physiology and exercise science, high performance, there are physiologists that know the endocrinology of hormone fluctuations and everything, and can help fine tune training and performance. That doesn't mean that you can't, there are plenty of world records that were done while someone was menstruating. Happens every Olympics. We're just now hearing about it, so that's good. But what you can do is, again, using the menstrual cycle as a tool to understand a person's body, and at the grassroots level, just showing that support. I see you, I hear you, I recognize that this is a challenge, and I want to support you, and not just by throwing some pads and tampons in the locker room. I'm going to go beyond that. I'm going to help create an environment where you can ask for help. That's some of the most heartbreaking and powerful responses we get from kids is that I have no one to talk to. I'm so scared. They get their menstrual cycle mixed up with ideas of sex and being impure. That's true. We need to break those taboos and break those myths open so that they can feel safe. They can feel like they can ask for help. And maybe they're not asking for help from their coach. That's okay too. If the coach can, or the physio or someone in their life, a PE teacher, physical education is a good place too, can help them have the vocabulary to ask for help from some safe adult. That's really the foundation of things. So there's no easy way, but there are ways. And I also I have a thing with coaches where I have a printout of 10 things you can do to support girls without ever asking a personal question about their menstrual cycle. You don't have to know when they're menstruating. You don't have to know anything about it. You can just share information, you can share knowledge, you can share vocabulary, so they can choose to share back whatever they want or not, or take it to someone else. So there's all kinds of different ways to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think we need more research, because when you say that there's research, there's no research showing this. Are we doing the right research? That is another question that we can ask. And you just mentioned the word taboo, and we talked about this a lot. And in our interviews, we hear the most crazy things. So taboo is also linked to language. And language is part of, perpetuating the secrecy and everything around this. So if I say I'm going to the moon, everyone knows what I'm talking about? Or that I've crossed the Red Sea? This is something, on the blob, all kinds of things. This is also something that we're trying to see through the research, and that's a cultural bit. And if you have, I know that there are people from different cultures, if you have different ways of, euphemisms for this, we'd really be interested to know about this. Okay, I have a question to you, Jacqueline, because, so how do we keep, and I think this is really important because I had the pleasure of being part of, the feasibility study that brought the GO here. And one of the most important things that came out was that we all work in our little corners, in silos, and that we have to work across sport, PA, PE, and that is being emphasized now. And this should be, the research should also be this. We have to look at these three fields, and they're huge areas of influence together. So how do we keep women active across their lifespans and address the gender disparity in overall physical activity levels worldwide? Action, we need action.
And patriarchy. There's the culture and there are systems, which we've talked about. It's not going to happen. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but it's going to take a long time. I gave the practical application of, remind me your name again. Emma. Emma talked about, I'm so happy you talked about social media. It's a part of life now. We need to put just as much effort into who our social media director is with any organization as much as we would for the HR director. This is how culture is being communicated. This is how it's being shaped. And like I said, it's visual and linguistic. So the terms that we are using, we've talked about terminology and gender-based violence as well as how important terminology is. Because again, terminology creates understanding. Understanding is collective knowledge of culture. The visual nature of social media, it's, for women, it's, I don't know a word. So it's a tool that can dismantle the negative health impacts that are happening via social media. So how are we going to get women at gender equity in physical activity, sport, exercise, any movement modality? We need representation because it's very interesting for me to be working in the public health sector. She said I like to dance. The public health sector, mostly within kinesiology and physical activity behaviors, but then hearing a bunch of perspectives from sport as well. Because sport, essentially, these athletes are culture, and they're what women or girls look up to. But the reality is not every woman is going to be a professional athlete. So we need more representation of the relatable woman active and in sport to influence health across the lifespan. Also, we need it to be more socially acceptable for adult women to play sport. There's so many more opportunities for men, and it's more socially acceptable that the men are on the weekend playing football, American football or soccer, and women, that would be weird socially, even though I think collectively we would all agree that it's not weird. But we need more of those social outlets for movement and sport past post-secondary education. Yeah, and then train of thought. Then lastly, the fitness industry partnering with sport and health organizations, being able to partner with the fitness industry because it's a huge industry that has its hands in multiple pots, to be able to start shaping that narrative in a positive way that's health-oriented and sustainable rather than just aesthetically focused and elite athleticism-driven. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you for asking.
Sarah, one more question. If we have time, we go back to the audience, because I think this is important. We're talking about action. So how do we make this research on menstrual health forward? How do we take this new research forward to make an impact on policy and practice?
I'll be quick because I want another audience question. Education embedded in your coaching certification platforms, in coaching professional development platforms, and in my dreamland, we're also including some element or pointing to it in safeguarding, because it is related. Those 2 things are linked. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, I think that's true, because the whole discussion this morning was on safeguarding, and every time someone said something, I kept thinking, oh, we have to have menstrual health in there. So that's really important. One more question from the audience. And make it quick. Yeah, gentleman over there.
Thank you. Great panel, everyone. Sarah, it's for you, if that's okay, and it's thinking with that idea of action in mind. I wondered for you what makes for effective menstruation education within coach education. I'm from the UK. The accent might have given it away a little bit. And in England at the moment, some NGBs or national governing bodies of sport are making progress in this space. But recognising my own positionality here as a man, I do worry sometimes that the education as it currently stands focuses very much on women's bodies and reduces them back to their bodies again. So I wonder what you think personally effective menstruation education looks like in coach ed.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And most of the coaches I work with are based in England, English football associations. Keeping it basic. You don't have to be an endocrinologist. You don't have to be a physiologist. You don't have to have every symptom that was up on there memorized. You have to have an understanding that there are these changes happening and that they're going to affect people differently, but I think you keep it very basic. And you make the coach is focused on creating an environment where people can ask questions. And maybe those questions aren't to you, so maybe there's peer leaders involved. Maybe you're providing, my first step with coaches is always like, provide them with information, a brochure. There's a UK group called Hey Girls. They're a social enterprise company in Edinburgh, Scotland. And they have brochures and they provide products, and you can embed those. They work with sport clubs. They work with schools. So give out this information so that you have common language, and maybe those kids will go to their parent, maybe they'll go to their teacher, maybe they'll go to you. And so you start from there, and then it can grow and progress in depth as they grow in age. But I think that's the foundation. Don't get caught up in the details and get past the myths. That's the key part too.
Yeah, that's it. I think we've run out of time, but I will take just half a second to read something to you, because we didn't talk much about menopause, and that's coming. And so, from the book, it's a long story, but this is how it ends. Like so many women accused of witchcraft, because we killed men and women, there was a time when we killed them as witches, she was probably going through the menopause. The end of fertility didn't only signal the female body's primary social use. Early modern medicine interpreted the menopause as a depletion of humors, which made the body impure and riddled with poison. Menopause was both a physical and psychological pathology, Women undergoing the change were seen as unstable, querulous, ill-tempered, and intent on doing harm. Menopausal symptoms, so poorly understood, were often interpreted as diagnoses of witchcraft. So to all the witches out there, go out and make it happen.